Take a look at this town. It's beautiful, isn't it? Minimalist, perfectly symmetrical. It looks like the absolute peak of the post-war American dream. There's a grocery store with fully stocked shelves, a state-of-the-art cinema, a perfectly manicured park. But if you walk down these streets in the summer of 1956, you wouldn't hear a single human voice, because just 24 months after the ribbon was cut, all 3,000 residents packed their bags, locked their doors, and simply left. There was no economic collapse, no natural disaster, no radioactive leak. Yet, an entire community decided that living in paradise was entirely unbearable. Today, we are looking at the lost town of Oak Haven, and the truth about why it was abandoned is going to fundamentally change how you look at the walls around you. To understand why Oak Haven failed, you first have to understand how spectacularly it was built. In 1952, post-war America was booming, and urban planning was becoming an art form. But Oak Haven was different. It wasn't just another cookie-cutter suburb. It was a masterpiece. The architecture was a seamless blend of modern engineering and natural elegance. Think of the design language you see in today's most premium tech products or exclusive high-end rural estates. Clean code translated into concrete. Everything was deeply intentional. The streets didn't have standard harsh intersections. They flowed smoothly into one another. The homes featured massive windows to let in natural light, yet they were angled so perfectly that no neighbor could ever look directly into your living room. The infrastructure was entirely hidden underground. When families started moving in during the spring of 1954, they thought they had won the lottery. The brochures promised a life of unparalleled peace. And for the first few months, that's exactly what they got. It was quiet. It was efficient. It was flawless. Perhaps a little too flawless. By the winter of 1955, the local newspaper, the Oak Haven Tribune, started publishing some unusual op-eds. Residents weren't complaining about crime or taxes. They were complaining about the layout. People reported a strange, pervasive sense of lethargy, a feeling of being subtly trapped. You see, those beautifully curving streets I mentioned? They were designed so that almost none of them offered a clear line of sight to the horizon. No matter where you stood in Oak Haven, your view was eventually blocked by a beautifully designed, perfectly placed structure. Psychologists today call this spatial enclosure. In small doses, it makes a space feel cozy. But when an entire town is designed this way, your brain slowly registers that you are in a maze. People started suffering from severe insomnia. Neighbors stopped talking to each other, largely because the pristine acoustic design of the streets completely swallowed sound. You could see someone waving across the street, but you couldn't hear them. The elegance of the town was creating absolute physical isolation. And then, the exodus began. It wasn't a panic. It was a silent resignation. By December of 1956, moving trucks were a daily sight. When reporters asked the departing families why they were leaving such a perfect place, the answer was almost always the same. I just couldn't breathe. By 1957, the town was dead, a beautiful, empty shell. Most historians wrote it off as a failed experiment in mid-century urban planning, a case of architects prioritizing aesthetics over human nature. But if you dig into the property records, a completely different, deeply unsettling picture begins to form. Who actually built Oak Haven? The brochure said it was the Apex Development Group, but Apex didn't exist before 1951, and it dissolved in 1958. It was a shell company. When you trace the funding back through a labyrinth of 1950s corporate holding companies, the money didn't come from real estate investors. It came from a consortium of behavioral research firms. The same kind of firms that, during the Cold War, were heavily contracted by defense agencies to study human psychology. Oak Haven wasn't an urban planning failure. It was a highly successful data collection exercise. The architects didn't accidentally forget to provide lines of sight to the horizon. The acoustic dead zones weren't a mistake. The deep, dark green borders of the town weren't just zoning lines. They were the physical boundaries of a petri dish. The town was designed from the very first poured foundation to test the psychological limits of environmental isolation on a civilian population without them ever knowing they were being tested. They wanted to know how long it would take for a perfect, clean, elegant environment to completely break the human spirit. The residents weren't homeowners, they were subjects, and once the researchers had their data on spatial disorientation and induced apathy, they simply closed up shop and let the rats leave the maze. Today, the ruins of Oakhaven are gone, paved over by modern highways, but the data they collected, it didn't just disappear into a vault. The principles of environmental manipulation perfected in that empty town are now quietly embedded in the architecture of modern airports, corporate campuses, and shopping centers. So, the next time you walk into a building that feels perfectly designed, perfectly clean, and wonderfully elegant, just take a moment to look for the horizon, because you might just be standing inside someone else's experiment.